What is up, Pitt fans? Thank you so much for tuning in to Inside the Panthers on YouTube. My name is Stephen Thompson, coming to you with my partner, Jack Markowski, after the Pitt Panthers dominated Boston College in their final road game of the season. They are 90 to 65 winners over the Eagles at the Conti Forum, another road ACC win. And as we've talked about, basically every win from here on out for the Panthers is a must win, and they picked up a must win in emphatic fashion. It was never really in doubt, to be quite honest. I mean, there was a period where Wake Forest fought back to make it a game and to make it somewhat close, but Pitt was unguardable from three. They got great nights from Bub Carrington and Blake Hinson and Jalen Lowe, and they never allowed this game to get even remotely close. We can talk about the threes, we can talk about a lot of guys, but in your mind, Jack, what was the biggest reason the Panthers were able to pull away for such a massive win on the road against Boston College?
Yeah, offensively, it has to be the three-point shooting. I mean, they hit their looks all night consistently. They only had one down stretch, really, which was right after Hinson was taken out of the game, but it was an absolute clinic just for the most part, 53.3%, 16 of 30 from behind the arc. They had five different guys make at least two threes. And we know that three-point shooting is their bread and butter, and when they're on, they're incredibly hard to stop because they do have so many guys that can hurt you from that area of the floor. And then in terms of other factors, I thought the ball movement was fantastic. They had 20 assists, which was their fifth highest total of the season, second highest in ACC play. A good off-ball movement as well. I thought they played with a lot of energy, played at a higher pace. And then defensively, what stood out to me as a big factor was how they defended Boston College's guards, Jaden Zachary, Mason Madsen, and Claudel Harris, all average a combined 34 points a game. And tonight they had 16 on 6 of 22 shooting. So I think it was just all around one of Pitt's best performances of the year. I've said that a couple times, but I really do think that was true tonight. Quentin Post kind of gashed them, but that's what you expect from one of the ACC's better players. So yeah, I think it's just a lot of positives to take out of tonight's performance.
Yeah, absolutely. The 3-point shot was, and I don't know, they were making some difficult looks too. I mean, they weren't all wide open. A lot of them were. And Boston College isn't a world beater by any means, but Pitt diced them up. They did exactly what you would want them to do and expect them to do against a team that, quite frankly, is just not on their level right now. I think the ball movement, you make a great point about that. That's kind of what led to all of these open threes. And on a night where Blake Hinson was good, but he sat for long stretches. I mean, he only played, I want to say, yeah, he only played 23 minutes. That is well below his season average. 9 shots is way below his season average too. He was really efficient, but he was far from the star of the show, and I think that was huge. Being able to not only, uh, survive those minutes when he was on the bench, but dominate them to extend their lead when Hinson was on the bench was really huge. I feel like that's kind of the biggest reason for me, and probably the most encouraging thing. I mean, we'll talk about it a little bit more in a second about how they were able to do it, but I think that was really the biggest factor for me. We talked about after those Wake Forest and Clemson losses, a cold night from Hinson is usually a death sentence for this team. And while he wasn't exactly cold tonight, he was off of the floor for a long period of time, and I think it was a really, really positive sign for this team, not just in the immediate, in the present, but for the future going forward. Because again, he's the only senior on this team. I believe actually KJ Marshall's a senior too, but he is the only uh, senior in the rotation that will leave after the season. And there's a long way to go before we get to next November, next October. A lot could change, but assuming you're able to keep this core together, it's a really positive sign that even when their best player, their emotional leader, and a guy who means so much to them in so many different ways, when he's on the bench, this team was able to not just survive but pull away. That was an extremely encouraging sign. We talked a little about Hinson, but you mentioned Bub Carrington as well. He had a career night, set a new career high in scoring with 27, 10 of 18 from the field, 7 3-pointers, 7 to 12 from 3-point range, 4 rebounds, and 5 assists to just 2 turnovers for good measure as well. What did you feel like was working so well for Carrington tonight? And do you think he's kind of turned a corner? I mean, he did have some midseason freshman struggles, but those seem well behind him and way in the rearview mirror at this point.
Yeah, it feels like he's pushed completely past, breaking through that freshman wall. Tonight was the first time since the first two games of the season when he had that triple double against AC A&T, where he's had three or more threes in back-to-back games. Also, his most points in any two-game stretch of the year, which doesn't come as a surprise because, like you said, he scored a career high 27 points. But yeah, I mean, he hit all kinds of shots. And I think his scoring ability at every level sticks out, but his three-point shooting was the story of tonight's game, whether it came, off the dribble, on the move, catch and shoot. He was just dicing up BC. There was no response. There was no answer, no adjustment they could make that was going to slow him down. He had it going like he did against Clemson on Tuesday. I think this sudden, 3-point revolution that he's had it's a huge development because it hasn't been a strength of his all season, but seeing him come into his own and really shoulder a majority of the load for Pitt's offense and doing a lot of it from behind the arc has been super impressive. And you can see why he's getting NBA looks, because he's looked like an NBA talent the past few games. He was more aggressive in getting to his spots too, created a ton of separation, was efficient, shot 55%. And then just, in other aspects, strong as a ball handler and playmaker. Like I mentioned before, played great defense on BC's trio of guards. So, yeah, I mean, seeing him make this leap is super promising, especially since we know how talented he is. And getting this version of him down the stretch with the remaining games that they have and how crucial those are to Pitt's tournament hopes, I think it makes those all the more realistic as well.
Yeah, I think you brought up his NBA potential, and that was really on full display today. Not only does he score a career high, but he does it with two executives, or one executive and an assistant coach from the Boston Celtics in town, taking the Celtics off day. Brad Stevens, president of basketball operations, and assistant coach Sam Castle were in attendance to see really the best version of Carrington, and a version of Carrington that I think, should he stay around at Pitt, that we could see last year, a guy who's taking a larger share of the shots, really leading this team with, like I mentioned, Blake Hinson not in the picture after this season. This week, into over two games, he's averaged 22 and a half points per game, 5.5 rebounds per game, and 4 assists per game, 10 of 16 from 3-point range, and only 2 turnovers over 69 minutes of action. He's bound, in my opinion, for another ACC Rookie of the Week award. It'd be his 5th. That leads the conference. I think we are seeing the best version of Bub Carrington. I think it's kind of been keyed by this switch and how they've kind of been able to integrate Jalen Lowe a little bit more. He is now kind of the primary point guard. They've taken Bub out of that role, not because necessarily Bub was bad at it, but I think Lowe being in there and taking on that bona fide point guard role has allowed Bub to play more as like a 2 guard and more as a combo guard. He can distribute and stuff, but he's able to focus a little bit more on scoring. He's able to play off the ball a little bit, which I feel like makes him he is stronger as like a catch and shoot guy. When you talk about the 3-point shooting, he's stronger in that area than he is, coming off of screens and shooting off the dribble. I've just anecdotally kind of noticed that he seemed to make more of those when he's able to spot up. And having Lowe on the court, who is such a great passer, such great vision, really, really helps. And then he's also been a fantastic, like, that's the other thing. I mean, we're going to talk about the scoring and the shooting this week, but he's also emerged as one of this team's best defenders, especially on the perimeter. He has such great length. He's so strong. He can stick with guys, and he started to take on that kind of personality and become a much more complete player in my eyes over this kind of second half of the season when Lowe's been inserted into the starting lineup. And I feel like that's really, really keyed a lot of different and good things for him. Like I mentioned a little bit earlier, Pitt not only survived Blake Hinson's minutes on the bench, but they really thrived with him off of the floor. So he sat for about 3 minutes, or excuse me, he sat for. I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong thing in my stats. Let me pull it up real quick because Blake Hinson, like I said, only played 23 minutes. He sat on the bench for extended periods of times with foul trouble. He sat for the final 14 minutes of the first half. Pitt was up 21-19 when he went to the bench, and they ended the half with a 15-point lead. So not only did they survive Blake Hinson being on the bench and him being a little bit quiet in the first half, but they thrived without him on the floor. That hasn't exactly been the case for most of this season. What did you see when Hinson was on the bench? How was Pitt able to really dominate those minutes and continue to play really well without their best player on the floor, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing was getting contributions from all five players on the floor on both ends. And I think the biggest move was Capel going to Federico in relief of Will Jeffress, which came at the 7 minute and 43-second mark when it was a 28-23 game. Pitt outscored Boston College by 7 points the remainder of the way. And I do think, and we're going to talk about it in a minute, but that two big lineup, I think, made all the difference in the world. And it's not really something that you would think would work with those two guys' skill set, but I think it confused Boston College's offense. It clogged the paint, made it tough for the guards to get to the rim, added a ton of size and length, obviously. And I think it also allowed Pitt's guards to defend Boston College's guards out on the perimeter without worrying about getting beat inside. Led to a lot of turnovers, got them out of rhythm. And then on the other end, Pitt's offense was clicking really on all cylinders. Like we talked about, the three-point shooting, got good looks. They were running the floor. As Graham's 2 threes came during that stretch without Hinson. Carrington got it going. Federico had 6 points in the first half, which the broadcast mentioned was more than his season average of 5 points. So I think, like I said, getting contributions from every guy on the floor on both ends, that's not always a luxury that Pitt's been afforded this season. Especially in offense. And we've also talked about guys needing to step up when Hinson's not going well, or in this case, not on the floor at all. And they really embodied that message in the first half, closed it out strong, took a 12-point lead in halftime, which grew into a 25-point lead in the second half. And I think the foundation for the blowout win was set without Hinson on the floor. It came down to a great matchup for them. They all bought in, played well in every aspect of the game, every facet. And I think everybody did their part when they needed to the most.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked about the ball movement. I feel like that was super crucial. I mean, there are times where when the offense is stagnant, and it did get a little shaky. I think Boston College cut it to maybe 10 points or inside of 10 points in the early minutes with Hinson not on the floor. Things looked a little bit shaky. They were getting up a bunch of offensive rebounds, which we're going to talk a little bit about how I think they solved that problem. But offensively, they were able to keep their heads above water, even without a guy that they can turn to for a difficult bucket on the floor when they need it most, because they were sharing the ball so well, and they were getting everyone involved, like you mentioned. This team at their worst, they are ISO dependent. The ball doesn't move; it sticks, and that was not what you saw today. They were really at their best, and it just felt like a well-oiled machine that didn't really need a guy like Hinson to be an electric scorer, to be this high volume shooter that has to be on the floor for Pitt to succeed. Um, when they kind of played cohesively and understanding what the competition was, and that Boston College has struggled a little bit this year, uh, Pitt was the best version of themselves and did exactly what you would expect. And open looks going down certainly helps, converting layups the way that Federico did, and they got some nice buckets from Carrington and a little bit from Mish Leggett here and there. That was the biggest part. It was, like you said, the buy-in. I mean, that's an abstract word. You can't always prove that just watching a game uh, from your home on TV or even when you're in the arena. But when you see a stat like 20 assists on 33 made field goals, I believe that's 20 assists on 33 made field goals. It's easy to see why they were able to keep their offense afloat and keep their heads above water, even without a guy who's going to be a surefire first team All ACC selection, could be a contender for ACC Player of the Year. Although RJ Davis is certainly going to eat up a lot of that airspace, especially after a big game today. But Pitt did everything they needed to with their best player on the bench. And that was really a huge reason why they were not only able to separate by halftime, but then just cruise to an easy finish. I want to talk about a different area of the front court. It's the double big lineup really helped turn things around for Pitt and shut the door when Boston College started to make things pretty close. It kind of coincided with when Hinson went to the bench. I mentioned they had some offensive rebounding issues. They were giving up a ton of second chance points to Quentin Post, who had an outstanding game. He had 30 points and 12 rebounds. A ton of those, or a good chunk of those, came towards the end of towards the midway point of the first half when Hinson was on the bench. It was interesting. This is kind of the first time we've seen both Federico and Guillermo Diaz-Graham on the floor together. What did you think they did for them when they were in the game, and how did it help Pitt to have those two guys on the floor together?
Yeah, I talked about it a little bit earlier, but I think they were able to clog the paint. They stopped dribble drives too. You saw it, forced bad passes out to the perimeter. And there were even times where Federico and Diaz Graham were isolated one on one against guards, playing on ball defense and held their own. They forced some misses. They were strong in their rotations, especially on screens too, when hedging or out on the perimeter. And like you said, it's not something we've seen before, but I think at this point, it's something that Capel sort of has to keep in the back of his mind. It's an ace in the hole, really. Like it's an adjustment that I think can really throw teams off defensively. And then offensively, too, we saw, Federico was, this word's a little strong, but he was fantastic, honestly, down the stretch in the first half. He had 6 points. He had a second chance layup, showed off some nice touch around the rim, which isn't always the case. That's something that, has been a work in progress for him. And his passing, too. That's another thing that we've seen show up at times this season as a playmaker, but I think it was on full display tonight. It's not something you want to depend on him for, but it's nice to know that he has it. And spacing also wasn't an issue. I mean, Pitt had no issue scoring. It wasn't clunky. I think they had a nice rhythm. And then moving to Diaz Graham, too, he made 2 threes. Second time in his last 3 games that he's done that. I think he held his own against post and one-on-one matchups. You don't expect him to stop him because not many players in the conference can. But I thought he was pretty physical with him. He was effective at different points. Like Federico, he had 2 assists. Was a good playmaker. Then there was also a play that stood out to me where Federico found him cutting to the rim on the back end, which it's an unlikely pairing in that regard, seeing Federico find Diaz Graham, which sent him to the foul line. But that was the story of the night, really. And, it's something that the 2 big lineup, I don't know how sustainable it is, really. It's definitely matchup dependent. But like I said, I think it's something that Capel can go to, in desperation or if the matchup lines up. And I think tonight it showed that it can be effective in the right situation.
Yeah, I completely agree. I thought Federico's finishing was a big reason why this worked. The fact that he was able to kind of expand the offense, make it a little deeper with his ability to make some layups through contact, and then Diaz Graham also giving them a punch from 3-point range. That was huge, to not only surviving those non-Hinson minutes, their contributions offensively were huge, and then defensively, just the added length. I mean, Pitt is one of the longest teams, the tallest teams in really all of Division One, and they used it to their advantage. They have been a strong rebounding team all season, but clearly with just one of those centers on the floor against Post, who's a really strong rebounder in his own right, they've got some tough guys at Boston College in the front court, and Pitt needed some help, so they just used the length. They used one of their best assets to their advantage, and having one guy who's able to body up post, usually it was Federico, and then another guy, another 7-footer out there who can sky in to finish off the rebound is huge, and it makes them almost impossible to rebound against. And that's only sustainable, like I said, if those guys are scoring, if they're making up for it on the offensive end. I think both of these guys are fairly competent defensively, especially Federico, and really the only difference between what's going to separate the two is how they're able to play offensively. Are they able to make the most of their open looks? Are they able to convert the easy ones? None of these guys have to do anything particularly incredible offensively to be playable and to stay on the floor. But if Federico's not converting his layups, if Diaz Graham isn't knocking down some threes, then you get really thin really quickly. And luckily for the Panthers, it didn't end up that way tonight. And, just kind of piggybacking off of that, I mean, you talked about it a little bit, but how sustainable do you think this lineup is? Do you think it's something that they could use a lot going forward? Is this something Jeff Capel will turn to a lot more? Because like I said, it was the first time all season that they've used this lineup.
Yeah, I think it's a tough question. It's definitely matchup dependent. I think it kind of reminds me of when he went to Jeffers against Wake Forest in a way where that worked so well in such a small sample size that I think the assumption at that time was that it was something he was going to go to, sending Jeffers towards another team's, post-dominant player. We haven't really seen that consistently since. So there's a chance that this is a one-off thing, just based on, how a potential Federico and Diaz Graham offensive pairing can limit you in certain situations. But I think if Capel thinks that he can get this sort of impact, especially defensively, on a nightly basis. I don't see any reason why you can't send those two guys out there in like 5 minute spurts together, give Hinson some rest because he's, one of the guys on the team that plays 38, 39, 40 minutes. So I think it could be used to spell some of Pitt's bigger hitters. And I think it really just comes down to, how they perform moving forward, both individually and together. I wouldn't count on it being a normal thing within their game plan, but I think I would be, in favor of seeing it, more consistently down the stretch.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right that this was kind of matchup specific and it was useful in this scenario. I don't think it's something that's particularly I don't know if sustainable is the right word, but something that they'll turn to very often just because, like you said, it limits you offensively, but it also takes some minutes away, likely from that three guard lineup. If you want to have Hinson on the floor as well, or if you've got to take him off. I think you're right. It could be used in certain spurts. I mean, I think about, if they have to see Duke again, or if they have to see North Carolina, who's got some good size as well, that could be a situation where they might use it. But Pitt has been a strong rebounding team all season. This was used to spell some rebounding issues in this game specifically. And unless that kind of becomes a problem again, which to be quite honest, if we're playing the odds, probably won't be. Pitt has been really solid on the board with just one big in their lineups for most of this season. So to that end, I kind of don't expect it to see it a whole lot. And I think you make a good point about that Jeffress adjustment from the Wake Forest game. This does kind of give me the same vibe of, yeah, we needed this for one game. We'll experiment with it a little bit more, but I don't think it's something that they're counting on needing to use quite a bit moving forward. Speaking of moving forward, we are getting closer and closer to the end of the regular season, the start of the postseason, and the ACC tournament, potentially the NCAA tournament. Let's talk first about that ACC tournament. The Panthers, with this win and pending the results of Syracuse Louisville tonight, they are currently in a three-way tie for fifth with the Orange and Wake Forest. They sit with a 10-8 record, still only 2 games back of Virginia in that third spot, and only a half game back of Clemson for that fourth spot. What do you make of their odds of moving up a level, getting to that double bye? And is getting the double bye something that you want to do or for this team? And as we look at their NCAA tournament chances, would you rather maybe have a longer runway, get to play a game against, a Virginia Tech or a Notre Dame? I forget. I'm not exactly sure how the standings would shake out. But would you rather get that chance to pick up another win, or do you want to, move up the ladder, give yourself the best path in the ACC tournament? Where do you kind of want them to fall?
Yeah, it's an interesting dilemma because, of course, a double bye would help you. It would move you, closer to earning the ACC's auto bid. You would only need to win 3 games instead of 4. But I think in Pitt's situation, you kind of do benefit from only having a 1-round bye. You want as many opportunities as you can to just pick up wins. And they brought this up on the broadcast too. I think having the single bye could help them back into a quad 1 opportunity in round 2, much like they had last year against Duke. And if they were able to win that game after winning a game in the first round against whoever they would match up with, I think that would do wonders for their tournament chances. So yeah, I think they still have a chance to move up a level in the standing. It's going to be tough because I think Clemson is a pretty easy schedule the rest of the way, and they have to fight their way out of the pack with Wake Forest and Syracuse as well. But I think it just comes down to Pitt. They need to win their last 2 games, and wherever they fall, and they just have to focus, on winning at that point.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, you can't really kind of manipulate your place in this. You got to win these last 2 games because a loss to either Florida State or NC State could be really damning to their NCAA tournament odds. So if you move up, you move up. But I agree, just win, and worry about your seeding later. I will say they're in kind of a perfect spot right now. I feel like we were talking about this before we started recording, but I believe they would be the 5th seed if the season ended, literally right now. I mean, like I said, pending the result of Syracuse Louisville later tonight, but they are listed as the 5th team in order on the ACC's official standings website. So, and that's where they were last year. They were able to pick up a win over a Georgia Tech, one that, according to a lot of people, put them over the top and put them into the NCAA tournament picture before getting that chance against Duke that they weren't able to convert on. But I agree. I mean, this is a different Pitt team than played North Carolina, and obviously they've beaten Duke, they've beaten Virginia, and they've come real close against Clemson twice. They've been with that team the whole way. So you think about their path to winning an ACC tournament, to getting that auto bid. I mean, it's not impossible to think that they could roll through to a league title if they get in the right spot and if they once the ACC tournament begins, because this is a team that's proven that they can play with the top rank of the ACC with every elite team in this conference. Moving on to their NCAA tournament odds, like we addressed a little bit, but Joe Lenardi moves them up to a next four out team before the day begins. A pretty big bump without really even doing anything. They've gotten some help on the bubble with a bunch of bubble teams falling in big games. What do you make of the NCAA tournament odds for the Panthers after this win over BC? A blowout should give them a healthy boost in the net rankings, and they kind of take care of business, like we said they needed to do after their loss to Clemson.
Yeah, I think you hear a lot about like quad two opportunities like this being games where you can't necessarily improve your odds or your spot on the bubble, but it can only hurt you. I think this is with a 25-point win, this is an example where Pitt can definitely benefit from having such a dominant win. And like you said, with bubble teams ahead of them losing, there's still some crucial games with teams ahead of them on the bubble coming up tonight and tomorrow. So I think, if they win their last two games, I feel like you have to feel pretty good about their chances of sneaking into the field. They should get a nice boost in the net and their predictive metrics and all that stuff. So it was a much needed performance tonight. It's something that they have to keep, building on moving forward, keep surpassing other bubble teams, because as they continue to win, other teams are obviously going to continue to lose. They're going to surpass teams if they just keep playing like this. So yeah, their tournament chances definitely saw a nice raise tonight for sure.
Yeah, I agree. They took a step forward. I'm not sure how big of a step forward. Like I said, this was taking care of business. It's what they needed to do. But it's a win over a Boston College team, really, no matter by how much by itself isn't really gonna, I think, lift you enough to like get you into the field or get you even into that kind of first four out category. They're trending in the right direction, and I think that's the bottom line, that they are doing what they're supposed to. The big opportunities will come later, but for right now, they will get a boost. How big that boost actually is, I'm not very sure. But the task was just keep winning, avoid bad losses, and don't don't screw up your chances. Don't lose your chance before you get the opportunity to really cement yourself, and that's what the Panthers did. So, got to be happy with that. The analytics, the net numbers will take a big jump. You have to assume, and the Panthers just took care of business for a night, and that's really all you can ask for at this point. But with that, we're going to head out of here. Thank you all for tuning in to another Inside Pitt postgame report. The Panthers are winners over Boston College in a big way. They'll be back in action at the Pete for their final two home games against Florida State and, NC State. A big finish, an exciting finish to the season coming for the Panthers, and we'll be here to cover it all for you. So make sure you like this video, subscribe to us on YouTube. That's youtube.com/@InsideThePanthers, and follow all of our reporting at InsideThePanthers.com. Appreciate you all tuning in, and we'll see you next time.